Okay, so you have a really cool deck idea, but you don't know where to start. So in this video, we're going to be going over an 8-step process that'll help you get that deck idea off the ground and become a better deck builder. Hey, what's up everyone? I'm Funky Monki, legend player and world famous deck builder. I've built several meta-defining decks including Secret Hunter, Broom Paladin, and various others that have influenced the meta. So today I'm going to be sharing some of my tips and strategies on how to create a deck and turn that deck idea into reality and become a better deck builder. And a quick reminder before we get started, this channel is dedicated to everything deck building and off-meta related. So if you guys are into that sort of thing, then consider subscribing. But without further ado, let's get into this. All right, so the first step in any deck building process is to first think of an idea. Now, this idea could be anything. It could be maybe you just opened up a cool legendary in one of your new packs. It could be that you thought of a couple cards that just work really well together. It could be that you just like playing fast decks. Maybe you like playing slower decks, like literally anything, but you got to start with an idea. So now that you have your idea, that brings us to our second step, which is you have to define your win condition. Now, is the idea that you thought of the win condition itself, or is it just a cool combo that you're gonna have to build a win condition around it? Now, the win condition doesn't have to be just a specific card either. It can be your idea. For example, like a stealth aggro rogue deck. I mean, the idea of the deck is the win condition itself, just the idea of just winning as fast as possible. And that actually brings us to our next point, in that there are 3 different styles of decks in any game. There's aggro, mid-range, and control. So the style of aggro is to win as fast as possible, and everything in the deck is built to make it do exactly that. Some examples of that are going to be aggro demon hunter, stealth aggro rogue, aggro token druid, face hunter, and many more. The next style of deck is going to be a mid-range deck. And this is where you have some really powerful turns around turns 4 to 6. And you just consistently put out just big threat after big threat after big threat until you exhaust your opponent and they just can't deal with them, and then you just smack them for a bunch of big dudes. Some examples of mid-range decks are going to be like Pure Paladin, Evolved Shaman, the old traditional Handlock, Guardian Animals, Druid, and many more. And then the last style of any deck is going to be Control. And Control aims to exhaust your opponent's resources and go to fatigue, or to get to some kind of late game one-turn kill combo usually. Some examples of these are like the now ETC Control Warrior, or like a traditional Shirvala OTK Paladin. We've also seen some Control Shamans, or like even some Control Warriors back in the day that ran Elysiana. So whatever idea that you thought of, or whatever combo, or whatever you're trying to do, has to fall into one of these 3 categories, and that does help you build the rest of your deck, so that way other cards that support this idea kind of help you support this win condition of whatever play style that you're trying to do with whatever deck that you have. And that brings us to our third step, which is to start adding cards that synergize with your idea or the play style of deck that you're going within. Now, what really helps with this step is to use specific search terms when going through like a deck builder or your collection. So for example, if you have an idea that you really want to make like a Treant Druid, you can go through your collection and search for everything that says the keyword Treant and just start adding those to your deck. Don't worry about adding too many cards or the right or the wrong cards yet. Just go ahead and just throw them into your deck just so you can get a general idea of the direction that you want to go or what it's going to look like. Using keywords really helps you out because, I mean, in any given time during the year, there's thousands of cards to sift through. And that does make it pretty daunting unless you can narrow it down. So for example, if you're building a control deck, like let's say a control shaman, and you just want to go to fatigue, you can go ahead and search for everything that says like destroy or deal damage, or if you want to heal yourself, like restore, so for restore health. Now, there are some cards that you won't find using these keywords that you'll probably eventually throw into the deck, but we'll get to that later. This allows you to kind of get at least a direction or an idea going for the deck and to add some of these really important cards. Now, when going through this process, if you end up adding a few too many cards to the point where you're running out, you could always write down the names of cards on a piece of paper so that way you don't forget these as you go through and build your deck later. Now, in addition to cards that synergize with your idea or your win condition, that leads us into step 5, which is you need card draw. every deck in the game needs card draw. So it is inevitable that as you play your opponents, they will disrupt your game plan for whatever you're going for. So unless you have card draw, then your opponent is just going to be able to run you out of resources or be able to draw into their win condition faster than you can draw into yours if they happen to disrupt your game plan. As a general rule of thumb, try to devote at least 4 to 6 draw cards in your deck for whatever style that you're going for. Now granted, some decks may be able to utilize less, probably not. Some decks may be able to utilize more, but as a general rule of thumb, try to stick within that range to start. Like obviously, if you're playing a combo deck like ETC Combo Control Warrior, you're gonna want a lot more card draw, or like OTK Lifesteal Demon Hunter, you're gonna want a lot of card draw so that way you can draw into your combo faster. But those are kind of rare exceptions. Now, some classes don't have a ton of card draw available to them. Classes like Priest, Paladin, Shaman, etc. And for those classes, card generation works almost just as good. But either way, you're going to have to either draw cards or generate them throughout the game to keep your resources going so you can keep the gas on your opponent at any point. Now, there's a lot of cards out there that can pull cards from your deck and then play them. Cards like Inconspicuous Rider, Phase Stalker, Allura, and I actually kind of count these as card draws because it kind of draws the card and then plays it immediately, which that thins your deck so that way you can draw into your win condition a lot faster. And then specific tutor cards are the most powerful draw cards of all. Cards that tutor something specifically from your deck. So that's things like Scavenger's Ingenuity, Corsair Cache, Cage Match Custodian, because sometimes these cards allow you to draw your win condition by itself. Like Cage Match Custodian draws the Bogs by Knuckles, which is the win condition for Evolved Shaman, but just being able to draw whatever you want whenever you want to, especially if you build your deck correctly, is extremely powerful. So if you can, try to utilize these specific tutor cards. For example, when I made Broom Paladin, I took an existing archetype like Pure Paladin, and I noticed that there wasn't a whole lot of draw in that class. Basically, they only relied on the card generation of Lightforged Crusader. So what I did is I broke the pure synergy, and I threw cards in there like Novice Engineer, Loot Hoarder, and whatnot to be specifically tutored from the Solhit's Pride. And together with all of this card draw, the deck became the #1 deck in the world. So you can see just how powerful card draw can be for a deck. Now, along with draw, that brings us to the next step, and that we want removal in the deck as well. No matter what deck you're playing, you will need to put removal in the deck. It doesn't matter how cool your combo or idea is, because your opponent gets to also play cards. I know, crazy, right? And by them playing cards, they have the possibility of disrupting your game plan or disrupting your combo or idea, and just playing their combo or idea even better and even faster. So in order for you to get along with your game plan, you're gonna have to kind of pause the game and remove their stuff first, and then continue on with your game plan. Now, removal is pretty proportionate to the style of deck that you're playing. So for example, if you're playing an aggro deck, you only need a few different forms of removal as like your just in case. And oftentimes these forms of removal can also double as damage, because you never want to sit with a dead card in your hand if you just don't want to use the removal or if you don't need it. So in a lot of aggro decks, their doubled up removal is going to look like an Eviscerate in Rogue, maybe a Bees in Druid, maybe a Kill Command in Hunter, or maybe like a Dreadlord's Bite in Demon Hunter. So that way it's extremely versatile. If they want to remove like a big taunt, they can, but if they want to use that to go face, they can also use that as well. In mid-range style decks, you're going to want a few more pieces of removal because the games typically go on a little bit longer, and you're going to want a mixture of versatile like face or removal, and you're also going to want hard board clears in there as well. So if you look at an example of like a mid-range deck like Pure Paladin, they have a couple of cards in there that can go face, like their Lightforged Zealot to give them the True Silver Champion, or they have like Consecration, which can also go face, or remove like Aborta Small Minions. They do also have some hard removal in the deck in the form of Barov or Libram of Justice. And then if we look at more of like a mid-range style like a Galakron Warlock, they also have forms of damage that can go face, like maybe Nether Breath. And then they also have forms of hard board clear like Cascading Disaster, or maybe even like Twisting Nether. If we look at some warrior decks, like maybe even like a Bomb Warrior, they do have cards that can kind of double up as both. So they have a Deathwing, which is a big dude after a board clear, and they also have a hard board clear of Brawl. So any deck that aims to go past like turn 6 or 7 or 8, you're not only going to want forms of face damage, but also hard removal as well, just as a backup in case everything goes wrong. Now, in pure control decks, whether you're aiming for a combo or whether you're aiming for fatigue, you're going to need a lot more removal and probably a lot less face damage doubled up as your removal too. So you can go for just hard board clears. Like if we're talking about a shaman, you can throw a lot of removal in there in form of like Lightning Storm, Hegatha Scheme, Earthquake, Tidal Wave. I mean, you name it in shaman. Or in warrior, you can do shield slams, brawls, plague of death, coerce, and I mean, there's a ton of removal in warrior as well. But whether you're playing an aggro deck, a mid-range, or control, you will have to have at least some forms of removal. Now that we have our idea, now that we have a lot of synergy cards around this idea, and we have draw and we have removal, now we can go ahead and start refining our curve and refining the deck a little bit. So this is where we can start adding duplicates of cards. We can start cutting cards. We can just take a look at our mana curve and see how that looks. Now, obviously, we don't want too many cards of a particular mana cost, and then we don't want some cards where we're just missing a mana cost completely in the deck. So during this step, it really helps me when I imagine how the games will generally play out ideally for the first like 1 to 5 turns of the game when playing this deck. Like when looking at the deck list, do I find that there's a lot of buff spells, like especially around like 2 or 3 mana, and just not a whole lot of early game minions to play those buff spells on? Am I playing more of a mid-range deck that has a lot of 5-cost minions, but not really much to do on turn 4 or turn 6 to be mana efficient? So the first like 3 turns, I would really look at your mana curve especially. That's really, really important in any deck. If you're playing an aggro style deck, you want a lot of 1-cost and a lot of 2-cost things. On average, a good starting point would be you'll probably want 8 1-drops and then 8 2-drops. And then you can just kind of start from there. Now for mid-range styles, they're a little bit slower, but you still want stuff to do for the first like 3 turns of the game. So you want maybe like 4 1-cost things, maybe like 2 to 4 2-cost things, maybe 2 to 4 3-cost things. And this allows you to not fall too far behind by the time that you want to play your really cool swing turns or really big minions during that 4 to 6 turn. Even really slow decks like control decks still want to play some minions in the early game. Like if you look at ETC Control Warrior, they still play a Evil Quartermaster on turn 3 just to contest the early board. Now granted, a lot of control decks 1 to 3 cost things in their deck are going to be more removal. Like in Warrior, you got like Sword in board, you got like Minefield. In Shamans, you have like what, Earthshock, you have Lightning Bolts and stuff. But you still maybe want at least a couple minions to throw down on the first couple turns just to contest the board and be a little bit more proactive. Now looking to a little bit later of the turns, it is kind of a trap for mid-range decks to throw a lot of 4-cost minions in the deck. You don't want too many. I would say maybe 2 to 4 in each spot. Actually, probably not even 4, maybe 2 to 3. Like 4-cost minions, 2 to 3, maybe 5-cost, and then 2 to 3, maybe 6-cost minions. Because if you have too many in that mid-range spot, then your hand is just going to be really clunky and really awkward. You're only going to be able to play 1 each turn, all the way up until maybe like 8 or 9. Then you can start dropping 2 of them in a turn, but that's pretty late. And now this is also a good time to talk about duplicates. So how do I know whether to play two of a certain card or 1 of a certain card? Well, if you look at your deck, if you really, really want to play a minion on curve on that turn, then include 2 copies of it. You know, like Blazing Battle Mage and aggro decks. Makes sense to include 2 copies. If you really want to play a Void Drinker on turn 5, so maybe you can start corrupting like a Cascading Disaster, then play 2 copies of it. For more situational cards, or cards that may be good in some matchups, or maybe bad in other matchups, try only including 1 of a certain copy of that, just until you get a feel of it and you can start playtesting it to know if you really want that second copy, if you're just really craving it just every single game. Or you may find that it's just always a dead card and you don't want it at all. But for those situational cards, try to include just 1 copy to start with. And those cards might be more like tech cards. If you think about like Kobold Sticky Fingers, or maybe like an Acidic Swamp Ooze, like in some matchups they're going to be awesome, in some they're not going to be so good. But if you're facing a lot of weapons, then you may find that you want a second copy, but usually just 1 is good for now. Now this next step, step 7, is a little bit tedious, but I think it's worth it, and that's to go through your entire collection, card by card, to determine what cards are going to be absolutely necessary, or to see if you've missed out on any amazing cards that you want to add. I've built a lot of decks, and even still, I'll go through this step just to make sure that I'm not forgetting about any card that's just like, oh yeah, when you get to it. So I'll usually start with the class cards of whatever deck I'm working in and then go to the neutral cards. And as I go through each card, I always consider, is the card that I'm looking at gonna help me achieve my win condition better than another card that I currently have in my deck? If so, then make the swap. If it's really tough to decide, if you're really torn between two cards, then go ahead and write down the card that you're considering on a piece of paper and keep that card in mind as you playtest it. And we'll get into that step next. And that leads us to the final step in deck building and the most fun, and that's playtesting your creation. So as you're playing your games, as we just talked about in the last step, take a look at the cards that you wrote down for consideration and think about the cards that you might want to cut for those. So the cards you might want to cut for the cards in consideration, if you ever get those in your hand, imagine, what if it was the other card that I wrote down? Does one card help you better in a certain situation than the other card? And as you play a few games, if you're always thinking, man, I could have really used the other card more in this situation, then go ahead and make that swap. And after a few games, like I'll usually test a good 3 to 5 games at first, maybe even more, go back to your deck list and then go through each card that's in your current deck list. And then think to yourself, has this card really helped me achieve my win condition? Have I ever felt like any of these cards were just dead cards in multiple games? If so, then I think it's time to cut those cards and add it in for something that might help you achieve your win condition a little bit better. This is also another stage, and that can help you determine if you want some duplicates of a certain card or some singles of a certain card. Like if some cards are kind of situational and you have 2 in your hand, one of them you're like, yeah, I loved it, but then the other one is usually sitting for quite a while, maybe adding just a single copy of that one. Or vice versa, if you use a certain card and you're like, dang, I really wish I had another copy of that for this situation, then go ahead and add that second copy or duplicate of it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really hope this video was helpful, so that way you guys can make the next meta-breaking deck yourself. If you did find it helpful, then make sure to leave a like down below. And this channel is dedicated to deck building and everything off meta related. So if you like that kind of thing, then consider subscribing. I am also going to be making a follow-up to this video, an advanced deck building guide. So make sure that you're subscribed so that way you can get notified when that goes live. And now I've got a question for you. Let me know down below in the comment section which one of these steps in this video was most helpful to you. Thanks again, stay funky, and I'll see you in the next video.